In this part of my series on the history of school inspection, we are going to look at the period 1918 to 1945. This was an era of totalitarian governments that used education and inspection for their own political purposes. In doing so, they caused lasting damage to the role and credibility of inspection. My name is Adrian Gray. I have years of experience in school inspection and I'm also an historian and an author. This video covers the period mainly up to 1945, but totalitarian control of school inspection extended for much longer in Eastern Europe and indeed in some other states too. We are going to see that political control of school inspection was ultimately self-defeating. But we'll also learn some messages for today, that to be credible and accurate, inspectorates need to be independent of political control. And yet, this is the trickiest part, if inspectorates are too independent, that can also create problems of public credibility and perception. So some of the important issues we are going to discuss had already emerged in the late 1800s. For example, governments had begun to see that education was an important social lever, and so keeping control of inspectors was of strategic importance. In many states like Germany, this had led to a bitter struggle between politicians and the churches, which also wanted to control education. Countries like Russia expected school inspectors to play a role in social and political control. But even nations like Norway could use school control to enforce issues like a state language. So what happened in the 1920s and 1930s had already been foreshadowed. In 1918, Weimar Germany is a good example of how things changed. In most German states, any church influence on school inspection was finally swept away. Two-thirds of inspectors had been clergy, but now school inspectors were generally full-time education professionals who then promoted new ideas about teaching. In Saxony in 1923, the debate about new teaching methods such as active learning divided older and younger teachers and also inspectors. This debate then became politicised. Opposition from churches and parents included targeted complaints against teachers suspected of being socialist, which forced inspectors into taking sides. The appointment of an inspector known to be a socialist led to the school strike of 1926. There was a clash between the views of inspectors and wider society. Radical educationalists and the new Nazi government soon clashed. In 1933, 56 inspectors in Prussia were replaced by pro-Nazis. Intimidation was used against teachers from the start. Many teachers and managers were sacked. The role of inspectors in this was perhaps less due to the use of radicalised children to denounce suspect teachers. Useless teachers also joined the Nazi Party and thereby were protected from losing their jobs. So the quality of inspectors and teachers declined as Germany's focus came to be on war. Both also learnt not to openly criticise Nazi policy and thereby to live with each other. With many of the best inspectors dismissed and fear of the consequences of honesty, inspection became ineffective in school improvement. School learning resources, as shown here, also became dominated by political ideology. When Mussolini came to power in Italy, he used inspectors to exert direct control over the school system, with a network of national inspectors and regional supervisors. Hundreds of inspectors were sacked. He then used special inspectors to directly inquire into what individual schools or teachers were doing. A fascist pedagogue and racial scientist, Piero Bargellini, became the senior inspector for primary schools. From 1923, Italian inspectors checked that the approved textbooks were being used. From 1928, they were used to enforce the use of Italian in borderland areas such as Slovenia. Often, the same inspectors continued in post, sometimes paying merely lip service to checks on the new textbooks. The role of the school inspector included promoting fascist ideology, including a new emphasis on health and fitness. This is an example of how priorities of inspection can change according to the political direction of the government. In 1934, Joseph Stalin, whose father was a school inspector, said that education is a weapon whose effect depends on who holds it in his hands and who is struck by it. In Russia, the Bolsheviks under Lenin began with a huge focus on school provision and literacy. From 1917 to 1931, the communists promoted new ideas about teaching, although as late as 1931, inspectors found that most teachers had only the dimmest understanding of new methods. Honest reporting was the victim as oppression increased. In 1920s, most inspectors blamed problems on lack of school resources and a shortage of teachers. But by 1930s, they were afraid to be so open, and they tended to say that problems were due to sabotage or betrayal. Lessons were then scrutinised for any evidence of politically incorrect attitudes. A maths lesson on the price of milk proved a disaster for a teacher, for example. In 1937, the identification of one suspect teacher could end with the purging of the entire school leadership. Some inspectors did try to protect teachers, but to do so put the inspector at risk as well. Authoritarianism in Russia reduced the effectiveness of school supervision and inspection. School leaders, for example, often altered test scores. Engagement with inspectors declined and inspectors became less evaluative. For a time, inspectors promoted new technical ideas about education. But from 1931, the Soviets returned to traditional practices of basic knowledge and systemic and solid instruction. Inspectors thus had to switch from championing one policy to, effectively, the opposite policy. At least some were aware of the negative effects of this sort of change. For example, teachers became disinterested in what pupils had to say, as well as less trusting of inspectors. But of course, any form of expressed criticism was dangerous for the inspectors as well as the teachers. In Spain, education had always been controlled by the Roman Catholic Church in alliance with the monarchy. Education was a battleground with Republican-influenced teachers. In the 1920s, Catholics accused liberals of trying to take over the school inspectorate using bribery and monopoly. The result was increasing centralised control of teaching. Yet by 1930, the royalist system under Catholic control was supervising one of the worst education systems in Europe, with very high levels of illiteracy. The new republic, which began in 1931, made education reform a priority, and this included a more robust and efficient approach to inspection. However, the Republicans were defeated and many teachers fled. Franco put the Roman Catholic Church back in control of school inspection. They enforced a new fascist ideology, old Catholic values, and helped to suppress the use of regional languages. This created lasting damage to the concept of school inspection. The political use of school inspection was not unique to totalitarian governments. The question for us is, how far is it acceptable for an elected government to use inspection to drive political priorities? Do inspectors have any right to challenge a government's decisions? Well, the new Irish government during the 1920s, building an independent state for the first time, wanted to use schools to promote the Irish language, This was a political objective. They recruited Irish-speaking inspectors who were known by all and sundry as the 12 Apostles, and they gave pay rises to Irish-speaking teachers. The inspectors rated the teachers, and teachers' salaries depended on what the inspectors said. But many of the best teachers could not be graded highly efficient, the top rating, as they did not speak Irish. However, by 1931, confidential reports showed that this had had a negative impact on the quality of education, but the government suppressed the report. Another critical report from the inspectorate was suppressed in 1941, and problems were blamed on reactionary middle-aged teachers. So there's an argument here between the evidence about education and the political objectives. So we might express the problems here in a very simple model, the key idea being about balance between government and inspectorate. In this situation shown here, the government is shown as being very powerful, much as it was in Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia. It is clear that when this happens, one of the first casualties tends to be honest reporting. Inspectors know what the government wants and tend to say exactly that. It becomes a far cry from the reporting without fear or favour that used to be the catchphrase of HMI in England. Good inspectors tend to leave because their skills are not wanted and their opinions might actually be a danger. Another result can be that inspection then becomes too focused on government priorities. We have noted the checking of textbooks or a language as an example. A problem caused by this is that real issues in the system can then be overlooked. The end result tends to be that inspection becomes irrelevant. People either hate it or ignore it, but no one listens to it. Well, here we have a situation where the inspectorate is very important and the government has little influence over it. Germany from 1918 to 1933 was something like this. Well, is this good or bad? The problem is that the government stops trusting the inspectorate. As was the case in 1920s Germany, parents and others stopped trusting inspectors as well. In a well-balanced system, government policies should be balanced by evidence from the inspectorate. But in this situation, governments tend to ignore what the inspectorate may be saying. Of course, a result of that will be that inspection findings do not lead to system improvement, especially if the inspectorate goes native and becomes overly aligned with the teachers. Fears of this sort of thing have persisted. In 1990s England, the government insisted on the new Ofsted teams having lay inspectors to provide a non-education professional viewpoint. This idea did not work very well in practice. One bright light for the future was established during this era. Leading educationalists like Piaget founded the International Bureau of Education in 1925. By 1929, it had established itself as the first intergovernmental body on education and became part of UNESCO in 1929. The IBE began holding conferences in 1934, and notably at Geneva in 1937, when they discussed how inspection could help to guide teachers in improving their practices. Their discussion included preferred approaches to inspection, but they were aware of the dangers. Inspectors, they said, should only offer, quote, direction in purely educational matters. This type of international cooperation has been very important in the development of school inspection and is continued today by the Standing International Conference of Inspectorates, which has many members across Europe. What does all of this tell us about school inspection today? Most of all, it tells us that the degree of independence of the inspectorate is crucial, especially as inspection spreads around the world. It is crucial because otherwise inspection findings have little credibility, nor will they be robust enough to lead to improvement. On the other hand, it is vital that the inspectorate reflects the values and priorities of the democratic society that it serves. Inspectors are not there to ride their own hobby horses. The inspectorate itself has to be accountable. This balance has to be struck in key areas such as the inspection framework. There is a fine line to be drawn between a government wanting it to include specific national priorities and a framework that becomes ineffective as it is too much about short-term political objectives, as happened in Ireland. Who takes part in framework discussions and consideration of what good looks like is therefore vital. To get the balance right, the issues of who appoints the chief inspector and who the inspectorate is accountable to are vital. In England, the inspectorate was set up to be accountable to Parliament, not government, which it still is to an extent, but the key appointments are made by the government of the day. This recently led to disaster when the government insisted on appointing a new chief inspector who Parliament had assessed as not having the right experience, but they went ahead with the appointment anyway. I also know of another inspectorate that became too comfortable inside government. Inspectors told me that they were encouraged only to give positive messages, with the result that the country's PISA rating later collapsed. Well, the answer to all this appears to be that the inspectorate needs to be separated from party politics and made responsible to the people or the state, not a particular party. But it's a challenging issue, as we have seen. I hope you have found this video interesting. You can read much more about the history of inspection in my book, shown here. This is available anywhere in the world in print or ebook versions via Amazon or direct from our website in the UK. If you're an inspector and your inspectorate is a member of SICI, you may be eligible for a book at discount prices via them. Thank you for watching.